are from Group 9. Today we will talk about topic inflation and employment. This is our member details.
Discuss about Chapter 10, Unemployment and Inflation. Unemployment is related to recession or economic downturn, which also known as deflation. Before we go into an in-depth analysis of unemployment, we must understand a few concepts and definitions regarding population, employment, labor force, and labor force participation. Population is the number of people in a particular economy. Population can be divided into two categories, which is in the labor force and not in the labor force. Labor force applies to those who, during the applicable week, are between 15 and 64 years old and who are either working or jobless. Individuals who are not identified as working or unemployed are categorized as outside the labor force or not in the labor force. They include housewives, students, institutionalized individuals, elderly persons, persons with disabilities, and those not interested in seeking a job. Discouraged workers are people who want to work but cannot get jobs that lead them to become discouraged and stop looking for work. Next is unemployed. Unemployed is someone who is not working but is actively making an effort to find a job. Someone who is not working but is actively making an unemployment rate is the ratio of unemployed people to the total labor force. For example, in the country X, there are 22 million people involved in the labor force. However, only 21 million people are employed. So first, use labor force minus employed, which is 22 million, minus 21 million equals 1 million, and then divided by 22 millions. So the equation will be like this. Next is labor force participation rate. What is labor force participation rate? The economic development of a population depends on the demographic characteristic of a population. Consequently, the proportion of the economically active population varies between the subgroups of that population. These differences are calculated by the particular activity rate referred to as the labor force participation rate. It is characterized as the ratio of labor force to the working age population, which is 15 to 64 years old. Expressed as a percentage of labor force participation, it can be measured by using this formula. Table 10.1 shows that the population, labor force, and unemployment rate in Malaysia from 2014 to 2018. You can see the table 10.1. Last but not least is the table 10.2. Table 10.2 displays employment by industry in Malaysia from 2013 to 2017.
Unemployment can be categorized to four types. The first is frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment exists because of the freedom of looking for jobs and imperfect information in the labor market. In the economy, frictional unemployment is unavailable and its period of time is relatively shorter than structural unemployment. For example, some workers will voluntarily move from low-paying to higher-paying jobs. The second is structural unemployment. Structural unemployment exists due to a shift in market demand over time, and technology changed the pattern of aggregate labor demand both at work and globally. For example, the manual task of collecting toll is replaced by machines in the electronic toll collection system. The third is natural unemployment. Natural unemployment occurs in a normal functioning economy. It is a combination of frictional and structural unemployment. The rate is around 4 to 6%. This type of unemployment occurs when there is full employment in the economy. The last is cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment usually relates to cyclical economies. It is due to the economic downturn or recessions. As demand for goods and services decreases, employment falls and unemployment grows. The summary of the type of unemployment is shown in Figure 10.1. There are two effects of unemployment, which is economic and social. For the economic effects, The first is reduced consumer spending. Unemployment leads to a reduction in consumer spending as unemployed individuals has less income to spend on goods and services. This can result in lower sales for business, decreased productions, and creating a negative feedback loop. The second is increased government expenditure. Government often increase spending to support the unemployed through unemployment benefits, welfare programs, and job training initiatives. This increased expenditure can strain public finance. The third is decreased tax revenues. With fewer people employed, tax revenue from income tax decrease. Additionally, lower consumer spending can result in decreased sales tax revenues. This combination will limit the government's ability to invest in infrastructure, education, and other public goods. For the social effects, the first is mental health issues. Unemployment can lead to significant mental health problems, including increased stress and depression. The loss of a job often affects an individual's self-esteem and identity. The second is increased crime rates. High levels of unemployment can drive some individuals to engage in illegal activity to support themselves or their families, leading to higher incidence of theft, burglary, and other crimes. The last is health consequences. Unemployment can lead to physical health problems due to stress, poor nutrition, and reduced access to health care.
For me, I will explain about inflation. Inflation is the rate of increase in price over a given period of time. Inflation is typically a broad measure such as the overall increase in price or the increase in the cost of living in the country. Whatever the context, inflation represents how much more expensive the relevant sets of goods and service has become over a certain period, most commonly in a year. The inflation rate is calculated as the average price increase of a basket of selected goods and services over 1 year. High inflation means the prices are increasing quickly, with low inflation meaning the prices are increasing more slowly. Hyperinflation is an extremely rapid increase in the aggregate price level. For example, in Bolivia, the price of 1/8 increased from 3,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos per week in 1984. In reality, inflation can be either good or bad, depending on the reason for it and the level of inflation. In fact, a complete lack of inflation can be quite bad for the economy, as we will see below with deflation. Deflation occurs when too many goods are available or where there is not enough money circulating to purchase those goods. As a result, the price of goods and service drops. Next, inflation measured by Consumer Price Index, which is CPI, is defined as the change in the prices of a basket of goods and services that are typically purchased by specific groups of households. CPI can be measured by using this formula. Let us have a look on table 10.3. The total expenditure in the current year and base year are 220 ringgit and 50 cents and 240 ringgit respectively. It's the reference price for comparison with another year. The base year index is 100. So it can be calculated as. In addition, to measure inflation rate by using the CPI approach, the formula is as follows. Where CPI 0 is the CPI a year before and CPI 1 is the CPI a year after. Based on the example, the inflation rate between the base year and current year is 3.04%. The calculation as follows. Another index that can be influenced and increased in price level is the Producer Price Index, which is PPI. PPI is the price index accepted by the producer at each phase of the production chain. It is categorized into 3 stages, which is raw materials, intermediate goods, and final products. It is also known as a wholesale price index. One advantage is PPI is that it gives an early signal of change in the CPI.
Type of inflation. There are 3 types of inflation, which is demand pull, cost push, and import inflation. For the first is demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when the overall demand for goods and service in an economy exceeds its productive capacity, leading to widespread price increases. This type of inflation can be triggered by factors such as increased consumer spending, expansive fiscal policy, lower interest rate from central bank, and rising export. Second is the cost push inflation. Cost push inflation occurs when the overall prices of goods and service rise due to increased production costs, such as higher wages, raw material costs, and energy prices. This inflation can lead to reduced economic growth as higher production costs and prices can dampen consumer spending and business investment. Thirdly is the import inflation. Import inflation is caused by the rise of import product prices. For example, Malaysia import textile where the price has been increased in India. Thus, the price of the textile will be higher in Malaysia. Effect of inflation. The negative effect on an inflation is shown by a higher price of goods and services and lower consumer purchasing power. However, the most important effect is on the real income of consumer. If the income is fixed or the rise in income is smaller than the price increase, the buyer power will be decreased, so the people will be worse off, or the real income will be fall. While if income growth exceeds the price rise, people will still be better off, which means that the real income will still be higher. Next, control of inflation. Inflation is difficult to eradicate, but it can be mitigated using fiscal and monetary policy. For fiscal policy, inflation can be reduced by implementing a policy of construction such as raising tax and reducing government spending, while for monetary policy, inflation can be reduced by implementing a constructionary monetary policy which can reduce money supply. In addition, inflation can be controlled by controlling prices and wages, such as selling prices for goods and minimum wages.
Inflation and unemployment are the major problems in the economy. The relationship can be explained by the Philip curve. The Philip curve was introduced by A.W. Phillips in 1958. The Philip curve indicates a negative correlation between inflation and unemployment. Figure 10.4 is a short-term Philip curve SRPC. For instance, at point A, inflation and unemployment are 7% and 3% respectively. If inflation falls to 5%, unemployment rate is rise to 5% at point B. Finally, at point C, inflation rate is 3% while the unemployment rate is 8%. In conclusion, when inflation rate is higher, unemployment rate is lower and vice versa. I think that's all from me. Thank you.